Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about estimating fraction sums and differences. So our learning target is for you is that you will be able to make reasonable estimates of fraction sums and differences using benchmarks. So instead of just adding and subtracting fractions today, we are going to be looking at how to estimate using those fractions. Let's look at our first word problem. Naheem enjoys riding his bike on the weekends. On Saturday, he rode his bike for 1 1/6 miles, and on Sunday, he rode his bike for 2 3/8 miles. About how far did Naheem ride his bike this weekend? So the first thing that I want you guys to look at is the key word here, about. When we're looking at any type of word problem, you want to make sure you're noticing all of the words, the keywords that are going to let you know what you need to do to answer the problem. And in this case, when you see the word about, that means we're going to be estimating. Okay, so I have my two numbers here, 1 1/6 miles, and I have the other number 2 3/8. If I look at my question, it's asking me about how far did Naheem ride his bike this weekend. So if I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing with my two fractions here, I'm going to be thinking about adding them because it's asking me how far did he ride his bike altogether. So I'm going to want to add these two numbers together. All right, so when we're looking at estimating, we're not just going to round to the whole number, we're also going to use the benchmark 1/2. So we can be rounding these fractions to either a 0, to 1/2, or to 1. So let's look at how we would do that. So let's start with the fraction 1 1/6. Now the 1 we're not going to worry about right now, we're just going to worry about the fraction 1/6. Is it closer to a 0, a 1/2, or a 1? So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to split my fraction line here into sixths. So I am going to, well, I already have this line here. Let me erase that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to split it into, this can be 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, and 5/6. And let me go ahead and label those so that we can have that. And now that I have all of my sixths labeled, I see here I have 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, which is the same as 1/2, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6, which is the same as 1. I also have 0/6, which counts as the 0. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 relatively equally spaced out fraction lines here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find where my fraction lies on here. So my fraction is 1/6, so I know that's right here. So I'm going to think, okay, is this closer to a 0, 1/2, or a 1? Well, obviously it's much closer to the 0 than it is to any of my other benchmarks. So I would leave my fraction of 1/6 at a 0. I would estimate it to be a 0. So my my number 1 1/6, my first number, would round to a 1 because the 1/6 we rounded to a 0, and so that just left our whole number 1 here, so we would just leave it at 1. But now we have the other fraction to look at. So we also have the fraction up here of 2 3/8. So we would be looking at the fraction 3/8. Remember, we're not worried about the 2 yet. We'll add that in later. So I'm going to go ahead and add in I'm going to split my fraction line here into 8 equal pieces. And so now that I have that, I can show that I can find my fraction on my number line. So I have the fraction 3/8, which is located right here. And so I'm looking which benchmark is the fraction 3/8 closest to. Well, I know that it's closest to 4/8, or in other words, 1/2. So I'm going to round my fraction of 3/8 to 1/2. So my whole number stays the same, but the fraction we would change into 2 1/2. So if I'm looking at the question about how far did Naheem ride his bike this weekend, I would add together my two rounded or estimates, 1 and 2 1/2, which we can easily do. It would be 3.5, because 1 plus 2 is 3. And then we don't have a fraction here, so we just have to add on this fraction of 1/2. So to answer the question of about how far did Naheem ride his bike this weekend, the answer would be 3.5. Now, I want you guys to start off when you're doing your turn questions using these number lines. And the reason I want you to be able to do that is because some questions, the fractions where it's a little bit harder to determine whether or not you should round it to a 0, a 1/2, or a 1. At some point, you will get more comfortable with it, and you'll be able to just do that without drawing out the whole number line. But as we're starting out doing this, I want you guys to be practicing using the number lines. And remember, it's just however many is in the denominator, that's how many equal spaces you need to have on your number line. Okay, so once we get used to using the number line, there's a few clues that we can be looking at to help us. And I want you to write these down in your journal because this is a good example as well. So go ahead and pause the video, write these down, but leave some space for some examples that we're going to also list underneath each of these bullet points. Okay, so hopefully you've written all of these things down into your journal, and let's talk through them now. So these are clues that help us when rounding fractions, compare the numerator and the denominator, how to compare the numerator and the denominator. So our first one is if the numerator and denominator are far apart in value, then the fraction is going to round to a 0. So an example of that would be if I were to give you the fraction, let me get my thing ready. Okay, if I were to give you the fraction 1/7, 1/7. If I were to give you this fraction, as I can see, my numerator is very far apart in value from my denominator. So I know that because of that, my numerator is going to be closer to the 0. Okay, so my fraction is going to be closer to the 0, so it would round to a 0. The next one says if the numerator is about half of the denominator, then the fraction rounds to 1/2. So a good example of that would be if I were to round, if I were to give you the number 2/5, 2/5. I can look at this fraction and I can say, well, I know that half of 5 is going to be about 2.5. So 2/5 would actually be very close to being half of 5. So 2/5 would round to 1/2. And this last one says if the numerator and the denominator are very close, and then the fraction would round to a 1. So if I were to have a fraction like 7/8, I know that because these are so close together, it's getting close to being a 1. So if I'm rounding or if I'm estimating, I would just round 7/8 to a 1. So those are some examples of how you can be thinking about it when you're estimating without using the number line. All right, so now it's time for your turn questions. I'm just going to give you 2. I want you to make sure you are rounding each of these numbers to the nearest benchmark. So that's 0, 1/2, or 1. And I want you to be drawing a number line for each fraction. So you should have in your turn questions on your WISC, you should have 4 different number lines. One for 9/10, one for 5/8, one for 8/9, and one for 8/10. All right, make sure you complete the your turn problems in your journal. Make sure you complete your watch, summarize, and question in your math journal. And make sure you turn in the assignment on Edmodo. Have a great day.